Maybe. Hey, I think we're live. Are you alive, John?
I am alive and kicking.
We're alive. Hey, this is Joe McCarthy, MoJOE Studio with John Comfort, and we're continuing our rich and fun and interesting discussion on themes throughout history that seem to point to God has a plan for reconciliation. And I take great comfort in that. And I found really enjoyed the discussions that we've had, evidence throughout human history that God didn't just wind up the clock and say, let's see what happens, but he's at work in our lives and showing us a better way to relate to our own stuff, to relate to the stuff of the people around us, and especially to relate to him, all of course, which is intertwined. Greet the people, John, tell them where you are this morning and lead us into this great discussion.
We're in our Southern California homes here, and we are continuing this conversation. The lead-in you gave, though, was a good one. We've talked all along about how this stuff is fundamentally about relationship. We could set this up once again by, I'm not going to reiterate everything we've done over the hours of conversation, but you can once again say there's problems in the world because we refuse to be mutually submitted to one another. We don't want to concede anything. We believe that we're proclaiming truth, and we believe we are defending truth. And the fact of the matter is that it's the truth that we have to be submitted to. And it's the truth that sets us free. We don't defend it. And so we're supposed to let go of that kind of stuff, actually. And it's just plain all the way through the Gospels, but we have a real hard time doing that. And so with that, we may want to cry some sort of relativism, but everything is about relationship. And those words are similar. And that similarity, it drives us crazy, really, because there's, you had posted a thing that said that there's actually these 4 different types of truth, which I thought was really interesting. There's like only one objective truth, but then there's a truth to different perspectives on truth also that people do. There's just a reality to that, and we've alluded to a few of those along the way, but there's, I'm seeing a 6 and you're seeing a 9 and we're both right, but we're just looking at it from different angles, and that can be really difficult, and it requires communication, and I think we've joked, if you want to know more about this, just get married, because that happens every day with marriages. And marriage is the model for the whole Bible. It begins with this wedding at the beginning with Adam and Eve, and it ends with Jesus and his bride, the church. And this mutually submitted model is ultimately where we're driving at. And it requires, everybody knows this, that the key to a good marriage is communication. Everybody knows that. But the ironic or double-edged thing is that as you get closer and closer to a person, that communication becomes harder and harder, especially if you're wanting to be stubborn, because you can stay stubborn past your dying day. But if you are open and honest, generally you can find a same page to be on with people.
Yeah, statistics about marriage are bleak at best, which I think would be an indicator that oftentimes we choose our stubbornness over reconciliation, over relationship, over what's best for the whole, as opposed to what's best for me, at least from my perspective. And you alluded to, different kinds of truth, and that particular article was talking specifically too about how there's a distinction between truth and honesty, because I can be very honest about the way I see things, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm right. So I have to be humble, right? Humility, to submit myself that there may be another side to the story, that there may be a truth that I don't see, that the other person's view of the 6 or the 9 is valid from their perspective. And that takes a great desire, one, for reconciliation, desire for relationship, and also a willingness to believe that there may be more to the story than what I know.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, even just simply the word reconciliation is, I think clearly we're in this world where so many people just simply want to win a debate. And it's not about winning a debate. It's about being reconciled to one another. But that is made difficult because it isn't just this, everybody gets their own truth. It's what is the truth that will set us free. And that requires looking at the planks in our own eyes first, and a real humility. And, words like authenticity are very, it's kind of ironic or double-edged that I'm having to explain that, yes, the word authenticity is real, and that's what the word means, and it's like they become buzzwords because we get frustrated with this whole process, and they're like, and if it becomes a buzzword to you, that can take on a negative connotation. You're like, I don't want to hear it. And it's like, I'm sorry, but it's how God set this up. So that's one of the ways you and I were talking about, where do we take this conversation today? And I think that this is a good lead in to going to this place of how, we've talked about these lofty ideas and history and narrative. And, I've said narrative is the key. And then we're saying how music is the way in and music is the key. But a lot of it is it's communication, and to what extent is music communication, and to what extent is story and parable communication. And we've been saying it from the get-go, but it can be reiterated again, that this is why I think Jesus taught in parables, because it communicates more clearly, because you feel it. You can either experience something directly, or you can sort of viscerally feel it in a story. A list of bullet points isn't going to convince too many people, but a story is what puts people over the top. And then, does music also communicate something, or does it tell a story? And most people who've given it some thought will say, it absolutely does. And then we can get into all those other things, but of like how music then is a discipline and an art, and it's these balances that are wondrous, really. It's of God. It's righteousness.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about this. I love this discussion, but it reminds me that the way we learn, the way we remember is in story, because it ignites our imagination. That's the way truth was passed on for many generations, long before it was all written down. The oral tradition was to tell the stories, and the principles, of course, were built into that. Yeah. And you're right. So it is in the arts and in the music and the creativity where you touch not only on the information, but also on the inspiration, and both are really needed for change, right? Information alone can be just boring, or it can be used as a weapon or a turnoff, right, or to browbeat people. But when you sew in the information with the inspiration, then you add a little motivation. Then you've got something where there is change is possible, growth is possible.
Yeah, and I think you are starting to then go into what I'm kind of driving at too, is that this is basic stuff. It is universal more than we realize. One of your mentors put it really well. He had been in ministry for many years, but he decided to kind of shift over into the business community. And he is still a faithful churchgoer and church leader even and whatnot, and loves to speak to churches. But he's like, in business, it's like this stuff is like lightning, because it is real to them. They realize, oh my gosh, this servant leadership stuff does work better, because then my staff does have better morale, and then they do more things that are better and better. Where I don't want to say it's fallen on deaf ears in the church, but it's not the same kind of effect. And so the tangible kind of basic reality is what I'm driving at, that this is what we deal with, and the stubbornness that we see is the problem. And you can see it on both left and right, but that's then hard for both sides, there's a lot of people on both the left and the right who have a hard time conceding anything.
That's true. Yeah. Having openness, having humility, the willingness to defer, all of those things, they just don't come too natural for most of us.
Right.
Some
Human
of
nature.
that's, yeah, some of that's historical, some of that's cultural, some of it's the upbringing, but a lot of it is just that ego, right? That gets in the
Yeah.
way, that says, if I defer, then somehow I'm going to lessen my value, or I'm going to lose my
Right.
identity. All of these fears that make us want to dig in and hold fast to our version of the truth.
Right.
Turns out that's counterproductive. That isn't helpful to us or to the people around us.
Yeah, and so you were flowing into some of that organizational development language and that line of thinking, but it lines up perfectly with what Jesus commanded, on Maundy, Thursday, which is where we started this whole thing. And then I was just going to take it into kind of communications 101, that it's that basic. Everybody has to deal with this, and your ability to deal with this is what's going to decide how successful or not you are. And that doesn't mean it doesn't come without problems. I mean, Jesus Christ wants an abundant life for us, but he says that comes from denying yourself. He wants an abundant life for us, but that comes when we are willing to also bear the cross and do the good works that he's prepared for us. And it doesn't, there is a cost. People will talk about that. There's counting the cost. There is a burden. We're just thankful then that burden actually is lighter than his was, and is actually where fulfillment is found. I mean, this is just rattling a few things off, but there's a million anecdotes we could look at, it even in business and in sports and in the literary world or whatever, that people will go all the way to the top of the mountain and achieve something great, and then they'll realize this, like Bono, I still haven't found what I'm looking for, though. This isn't it. A guy won a Nobel Prize and realized it wasn't fulfilling. Coaches who win national championships and realize, no, that wasn't it either. And I was just watching a documentary on Hollywood, of how difficult it can be to pursue Hollywood and then actually achieve something in Hollywood and then realize that wasn't it. And people who aren't rooted in something greater, which I would say, it needs to be God, it can drive them into real despair.
Absolutely, yeah. I think I mentioned this before. This is a dated story, but an interview with Madonna in Vogue magazine, where she talked about, all the things that I accomplish is because I love that feeling when I do something spectacular and people stand and applaud and they're in awe of whatever it is that I have done that maybe hadn't been done before, a new way of doing things. And she said, but the joy that I feel, that feeling that I'm after, it fades rather quickly, and then I'm back in the cycle of trying to do something else, something new, something more. And she was very self-aware that all of those pursuits do produce wonderful things, but they're not things that last. They're only temporary fix for what we're truly longing for, and that's true and lasting meaning for ourselves and for our existence.
Yeah. And so on those really basic levels, like I'm kind of layering that back on, but like with a business, it is better for your long-term business health to have staff who have everything they need to do what they're supposed to do. And that includes, you've got to pay them a decent wage. I just saw this thing that literally the minimum wage can't pay for a 2-bedroom apartment in any county in America anymore. That if you work a full-time 40-hour a week at minimum wage, it doesn't pay for a 2-bedroom apartment anywhere in the United States anymore.
Wow.
That pressure on people, it won't hold. It doesn't work. So leaders are going to have to figure out that's got to be balanced. It doesn't work.
Yeah, of course. So then you hear the word side hustle a lot, and it becomes not just an interesting hobby, but it becomes a necessity for survival for a lot of people.
Yeah, and that pressure creates a lot of negatives in this world, especially when you see it, against. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but yeah, there are people who aren't hurting for money. And
Right. Yeah.
they then take on these. Like I actually, I live here in Long Beach, California, and we've got these billionaires who are doing this space race, and Long Beach is benefiting from that. And there may be an inevitability to the notion that we are going to have private enterprise taking people into space at some point, maybe. And there is value in that, but you have to be really realistic about that, of like, do people belong in space for a long time, or is there something else that people are interested in? And I'm not trying to be too conspiratorial here either, but our interest in Mars, we could terraform Mars and go to Mars, but we also have the ability just simply to try to take care of this planet better because it's already here. And we've alluded to the fact, I'm just saying, like, reconsider these things and rethink them. And that rethinking is repentance, actually. And that starts to feel heavy. But I'm just saying, it goes to that point again, that like you could go to the moon and that might be great, but you can't breathe there. There's no real water there. It's just a big rock. And like, there's a tree outside that's way more interesting, actually, if you just think about it. There's a little bee buzzing around there that can't live on the moon. It's way more interesting here. We need to value what we've got. The grass is not greener in this context. So.
Yeah, I think there's that innate drive or curiosity for novelty. Even as you were talking about, how does these principles apply? How do they land in a church audience versus in a business audience? Sure. I think sometimes you get so familiar with something that it loses your interest. You're like, okay, I've heard that, been there, done that. Whether or not you've really grasped it or implemented it into your life, that's a whole other question. But there is this, and I think this is part of the way God has created us, that we're always curious. We want to learn something new. We like the novelty. Our mind is drawn to that. And of course, marketers know that very well. And so I try to make the old things sound new. But as we're talking about, that's not necessarily a bad thing unless it's not in balance, right? If it's not in check, where you are dumping things that are really important, that are common and that you're familiar with, just for novelty, at the sake of something that's really important, that's really that can be damaging if it's not tended to properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that called into these kind of balances and whatnot. It can be, it's difficult to do because it does require that. The balance is the mutual submission that we're talking about. And it's, again, it can be very frustrating, and especially if you choose to go down that path. It's, if you want to keep arguing, you can, but at some point it becomes self-defeating, is, I guess, what I'm sort of saying here. And again, the point I'm wanting to make today is that it is that basic. There's these, again, I said the lofty ideas. There's a lofty idea that a sign of genius is the ability to balance two seemingly contradictory ideas at the same time and still move forward. I think Scott Fitzgerald maybe said something like that. I think, argue with him a little bit to say, maybe, and maybe some people are a little bit more inclined towards it than others, but everybody deals with this. It's as simple as communication, of simply talking to another person. When you do that, you are balancing how they perceive you and how you want to be perceived, and trying to stay on the same page. We even do this with our own selves, and when we don't even quite know what we're saying, like, I think what I'm saying is this, or what I mean is this, or no, what I meant was this, that kind of stuff. It's communication, and you're trying to be clear with yourself and with one another and stay on the same page, and it requires this balance and this accuracy, this incisiveness, this clarity of purpose and communication. It's going on all the time.
Yeah, two thoughts to that. You said one of the important things is that we talk to people, and it's good to make a distinction between talking to people and talking at people, because that's not really communication. If I'm just stating whatever I think, and I don't really care about what you think, I don't really want to even entertain the thought that there might be a different perspective that could have truth. All I want is just to state my piece, right? And the other thing that you've talked about and you've touched on is authenticity, which, yeah, that's kind of a buzzword that people may or may not discount. But I can't help but immediately go to social media and how really social media is a platform that facilitates us being inauthentic because we can touch up our photos and only post the ones that make our lives look fabulous. As some person says, Facebook becomes fake book pretty quickly just based on the selection of what you choose to post. And I'm not advocating for, spewing all the negativity that's going on in your life. I'm just saying that really can be a one-way conversation, which isn't dialogue. It isn't relationship. It's just saying what you want to say because you want to say it.
Yeah, I'll be a little bit cautious here. It's just worth saying though, because it's too open a thing. I have heard the idea from some particularly rigid fundamentalists who have said, they've literally communicated this idea. They've said, okay, fine, I'll have a dialogue with other people, but it's got to end in conversion. And I'm like, that's not dialogue then. You're not understanding what you're saying. You're contradicting yourself in your own words. And it's like, I don't know what to do at a certain point.
Yeah, and I think too, there has to be, none of this will really take flight. None of this will really, seeds will not be planted. It won't flourish unless there's a compelling reason, like compelling why, where we truly believe that a mutually beneficial relationship is a preferred future for all of us, as opposed to just being entrenched in what I think and what I see and what I believe is true, and I don't want to be dissuaded otherwise. And like you said, that takes work, which is probably why most of us don't do it all that well, because the easy road isn't necessarily the best road, but it is where the water tends to flow.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus himself is the way, and he himself talked about how there's a wide path and a narrow path and all these things, and we have to, but the thing that ticked Jesus off the most was self-righteousness and sanctimony and believing that you alone know that path, that path is actually found in that dialogue, I think, and in that recognition that you don't know it all by yourself, that it's found in this balance again, and again, you can go down organizational development, leadership routes and whatnot, and that curriculum itself talks about communication. But to take it all the way back, I just was going to share then that I've taken a lot of affirmation over the years of how basic these things are. And like, I saw them, especially, I taught a basic community college level communications course for several years. And that course itself was just so rich though, because it was about these very basic things. It was not lofty, ivory tower academia at all. It was very straightforward and very, very, breaking down though that this is what is happening. And they started at the very beginning. And this is a worthwhile point to be made also, that for all of our hand-wringing that the world is just falling apart, people have always thought that. People have always thought that the world was falling apart, and that like Socrates was put to death for corrupting the youth because the old people around him thought he was corrupting the teenagers, because 5,000, well, let's see, it was probably 3,500 years ago or so, they were concerned that the teenagers were corrupted, and you can find teenagers in the Bible that the prophet, is it Elisha, strikes down these teenagers with a bear because they were disrespectful to him. The teenagers in the Old Testament were disrespectful to their elders. Yeah, guess what? It's just what human nature is. I mean, if you want to look at some scandal, oh my gosh, the book of Corinthians is riddled with awful scandal. I don't even really want to know what they were doing, and so like Sodom and Gomorrah, for heaven's sake, goodness, and like, as bad as Hollywood is, I don't know if it was worse than Sodom and Gomorrah. And so this has always been happening since the beginning. There's nothing new under the sun, and that was written 4,000 years ago. So I saw this kind of amusing thing just the other day that I think was legit. It said that Plato himself, 3,000 plus years ago, he didn't like advances in writing stuff down and in putting stuff on paper because he felt like it would compromise our ability to remember things, and it renders us less inclined than just to talk to our fellow man, you know? And so Plato was like, oh, these new technologies.
Yeah, man.
So long ago. So the communication textbooks started with that stuff, with these ancient Greeks and the basics of where that started. But its point is that this is as old as time. This has always been happening, and it's just basically how do you deal with another person, and then they dive into all of these realities, which we could talk about at greater length. But the most basic thing is again, I want you to perceive me a certain way, but I've got to balance that against how you actually perceive me. And that is this tension that we've been talking about all along. And people can get frustrated with this idea then that perception is reality, but it's so basic. It goes to like two of the clearest examples are like, I think I'm cool, so I'm going to ask this girl out. Does she think I'm cool also? Because that affects my reality. Or I apply for a job. I think I'm awesome, qualified for the job. Do they think I am awesome also? If they don't, it affects my reality. And so that's where this book starts from. And it's just communicating this balance that's always been there and is going to continue until the end of time that we all live in.
Yeah, that's perfect. I was just listening to a man talking about truth and authenticity, and he was saying, speaking truth about yourself means first you have to be willing to look at it and admit, that there are things about you that are awesome and things about you that aren't, and not being afraid then to let the parts that you don't like out, especially to those who care about you and who aren't going to use that against you. And he said, and so it took him a while, and I can feel this pain, that when someone would give him negative feedback about what he was doing or how he was coming across or their perception of him, his natural response is to defend himself and say, well, their reality is wrong, right? They've got it all wrong, and I'm fine. And he said it wasn't until he allowed himself and almost forced himself to get in the habit that anytime he got what he perceived was negative feedback about his actions, his words, his intents, that initially he would interpret as misinterpretation, for him to stop and say, is there something there? Is there something that I need to learn about myself that I can't see from the inside out? That actually their perspective will make me have a healthier and a more complete view of who I am because of how I come across. And boy, that takes rigor. That takes self-assurance that everything's not going to fall apart if I admit that I don't have it all together. Right?
Yeah, no, I love that. You said you're inclined to say there in that moment, self-assurance, which is confidence, but it's simultaneously then also the humility to be willing to say, yeah, I'm not perfect though.
Yeah.
And there's that, I think we had said that, like everybody is still looking for some answer. And sometimes, you go to these gurus, and the gurus often are saying a lot of really, really good things that are very much rooted in real truths and things like that. But because they're not perfect either, they can sometimes start to get off track a little bit. And getting off track a little bit, like we've talked about, like a golf swing. If you get off track a little bit and you don't correct, it'll get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And so that can happen with gurus. And so I think we mentioned, like people are looking at like The Secret and laws of attraction. I think maybe to blow The Secret, wide open, it's in that balance of that. It's these laws of attraction. It's very attractive when you're confident, but it's also very attractive when you're humble. And then there's a real authenticity there authenticity is real, that people find attractive, And then so it's just once again, it's just And so at the same time that we seemingly are talking about the lofty, no, it is every day. It's basic.
Yeah, and I also think about how insecure I feel
Yeah.
when I don't tell those I care about, when I don't tell those I care about the whole truth.
Right.
I'm painting a picture that I think they'll like better, that they'll like me more, or that they'll think higher of me because I either left a little bit out or I changed a little bit of how I presented it. Spin was a common word. But quite honestly, that actually makes me feel less secure, less
Yeah.
self-assured, because there's always that question mark in my mind that if they really knew the whole truth, would they still care about me? Would they still want to be in a relationship with me? Would they still value me? And the more you do that, the less secure you get, and life becomes really fragile really quick.
Yeah, absolutely. That not doing this, again, it goes to a self-defeating place really quickly, and so this basic textbook then went into this, and I would love to actually flesh a lot of these out, and these might be workshops that you and I would do someday, or following up after a big worship service or whatever. And so I'm vision cast there a little bit, but yeah, just simple concepts of how we function in interpersonal relationships and with groups that are a little bit different than teams, and how do teams and groups function a little bit differently. One might be a little bit more intimate, like family, and what we kind of sometimes call tribe, versus actual teams when there's real accountability built in with an actual leader and actual roles that actually have to be played. All of these things, I'll dig into them a little bit, but it's about both leadership, but also teamwork, of how to be a good team player and a good leader, and are the best leaders this kind of leader or that kind of leader. But all of this you can find right in the Bible too, that it's all in there. These are these universal truths, actually. A real basic one is just simply the body of Christ. There's all kind of group theory and whatnot of saying, oh, it seems like groups kind of function like, you could liken it to the human body. And I'm like, yes, you sure can liken it to the human body. And I think we had said on a previous podcast that, yeah, and like your big toe is a big deal. If you lose your big toe, that's a problem, your stomach might be just as important, and knowing things in your gut is kind of why we say that. But the reality of your stomach compared to the reality of your heart and your brain, it's hard to pick which one is. They're all important. And that goes to, understanding how teams work. And that's this mutually submitted thing, that how does this work best?
Yeah. I think, we can deceive ourselves pretty easily. I know I can, to think that I can handle this on my own. I don't need any help. I'll just do it by myself, and therefore I'll get it done right, and I'll get it done faster.
Sure.
But
that's sometimes true.
Yeah, right. Sometimes that is true.
That's true.
Yeah. But then, of course, like if you use the family metaphor, then you do that with your children. Your children never learn how to do that for themselves because you weren't willing to teach them or get them involved. So there's always this balance, which we go back to balance, right? And I think, too, that when I look at people who have accomplished great things, either as an individual or as a group, generally they get to a point in their lives, in their careers, in their accomplishment, where they'll say, I can't do this alone. I didn't do this alone. Whether it's an individual accomplishment or a team accomplishment, they'll say, if it weren't for my parents, if it wasn't for my mentors, if it wasn't for this person who redirected me, everybody can name a litany of people who helped make it possible for them to succeed. So it's really a sign of maturity and authenticity to realize I can't live in a bubble. I can't thrive, right? I can't flourish just if I keep myself isolated and say I'm just going to do this thing alone.
Yeah. No, and I'm gladdened too that you went to like parenting as the example, because it is one of the most classic examples, and it is then like our relationship with God the Father, that in these textbooks, and there was a couple actually. I taught a communications course, and then a group theory course, and then there was a couple of other developmental courses but it all had the same stuff, and it was layering on to. It had communications as the founding, and then what is effective leadership and teamwork. And they broke leadership down into 3 types of leadership. And then the thing that I emphasized, that I wish the textbook had done a little bit more explicitly, but I always then emphasized how every good leader has to know how to balance all of these 3 things. And it was that you have leaders who are a little bit more dictatorial and just want to tell you how to do it and just do it that way because I said so. Leaders that are a little bit more democratic in their style of trying to say, can we build consensus on how we want to do this? And then there are leaders that are a little bit more laissez-faire, with that French term to just let it happen, which means leaders who try to stand back and let people figure it out on their own a little bit. And the text was a little bit leaning towards there's this type of leader, and then there's this type of leader, and then there's this type of leader. And I was like, but you realize every leader has to know how to do all 3 of these and have the instincts or the knowledge or the wisdom of when to apply which. And parenting is as far as you have to go to see all 3 of those. That a parent sometimes does have to say, we're going to do this, and you're going to do it whether you like it or not. And sometimes, this is a little bit, you have to use this sparingly, but sometimes the answer is because I said so. Usually you want to explain why we're doing something, and usually you want to then build that relationship with your child. But if they're just being obstinate, occasionally you do just say, you know what, I'm not going to debate this with you anymore. You're going to just do it. And that's important. The parents know how to do that sometimes. Parents, though, also from a very early age will start to build consensus with their children, simply saying things like, what would you like to eat? Or what would you like to watch? Or what do you want to wear today? What do you want to do? And let's talk about it. Or what is a good way to handle this situation or whatever. And to really kind of talk about what's the best practice. And then, yes, sometimes, obviously, parents have to be more laissez-faire and take a step back. Because if, like you just said, if you do it all for them, then they can't learn on their own. And so the interesting thing then is, in balancing that, though, you can get to a place where you start to then, you can see arguments, over how to do this. Like at the playground, the dad might be willing to say, yeah, let him go swing on the monkey bars. Where mom's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And that can create conflict. But the illustration is still clear that this is what happens. And so whether it's a coach or a boss or a parent, you've got to be able to do all 3, and it requires balance. And so my ultimate point is that, yeah, and it's right here in this basic communication 101 textbook. It's something that you can start learning from, an early age, and yet you'll be still thinking about it for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and so to be a good leader or a great parent or coach, not only do you have to know how to lead in all those different kinds of ways, but you have to know when. You have to be able to choose carefully as to what type of leadership is required in this situation and why. And I think one of the whys that you and I have come back to many times is that the best possible why is asking the question, what is the best possible outcome for those that I'm leading, those that I'm parenting, for those that I'm coaching? So when I choose a style of leadership, whether it's just you do it this way and we don't have time to talk about the why, or you won't understand it anyway, all the way to you decide, it's really about choosing which way you're going to lead is about what's best for the people that I'm leading, which of course then will be best for the team or the organization or the group as well. And to ground it in a real life story, I heard Simon Sinek talking maybe a few days ago, and they were asking, who was really helpful in informing who you've become and how you see the world and what kind of leadership style you choose now. And he talked about this leader that he had earlier in his life who would never answer any of his questions directly. He would always just answer the question with a question. Yep. And he said it drove him nuts. So he would go to his boss, and this particular guy that was a really empathetic, compassionate leader, and he'd say, "Man, I really got myself in a pickle now. That I'm in really hot water. I'm in trouble. I don't know what to do." And his boss would say, "Yeah, that sounds hard. What are you going to do?" He says, "No, tell me, what should I do?" He's like, "I don't know. What are you going to do about that?" And he would just keep turning it back to Simon until Simon realized, okay, I'm not going to get any answers from this guy. And then he would have to, in dialogue, come up with possible solutions. What can I do? What are the options? What are the pros and cons for those options? And he said, as frustrating as that was probably one of the most important relationships that he had in his work life to help him figure out, what do I do when things go wrong? Because inevitably they will. But what kind of leader will I be in crisis?
Yeah. No, there's a million great examples too, but that sounds like a one to add to the list. And that is very much a Socratic form of teaching and whatnot. That it's you want to get them to answer the question themselves. People will talk about how the best leaders are the ones who are so out of the way that they think they did it all by themselves. And it's very empowering then to do that. A quick example that comes to mind, I'm dating myself slightly, but Phil Jackson. Many people think he's the most successful NBA coach of all time. And one of the things that he was noted for was that he wouldn't call timeouts when everybody else thought he should call a timeout. And he was like, no, they need to figure this out. If they can figure it out, then we're going to be better off. And then that might lead to another championship. And it turns out he was right 11 times,
Yes, right.
But people will describe him too, to say that he could be really tough in practice sometimes. And he was also very specifically building consensus on that team as well, of saying, what do you guys think? How do you think we should handle this situation? Maybe not on the bench during the game, but in practices and stuff like that, he would want. In fact, if you dig in, like Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant are lifted up as these great, all-time great players, but most people have also noted that they weren't the easiest teammates to get along with. And the real strength that Phil Jackson may have brought in there is in his leadership, he was able to preserve the confidence of all those other players on the team in spite of this domineering, alpha at the front. To say, I still need you, though, to be able to hit that shot. And I value you in that role. And I'm going to make sure you know that, and the whole team knows that, and that he maintains everyone's morale for the good of the team, obviously. And even with these difficult guys leading the way. Yeah,
that's a great model of leadership, too, is that Phil, and I saw this in the documentary about Michael Jackson, The Last Dance. Phil Jackson, not only did he have very astute leadership and how to handle those things, but then he would even make decisions on how to communicate, how to lead each individual team player based on their quirks, their personalities, their strengths and weaknesses. But he became a student of human nature, right? A student of human dynamics. And so his leadership, he wasn't duplicitous in his leadership. He was very astute in applying the type of leadership that was necessary for each individual in order to get the entire group to work together and accomplish great things, unprecedented things.
Yeah. And all of that is empathy, and it's fundamentally loving at the end of the day. We might be a little hesitant to say all of these things are rooted in love, but they are ultimately, that even a boss with his staff or her staff, there's boundaries and appropriateness to levels of how you express this. But if I want the best for you and I want you to thrive, that's fundamentally a loving endeavor then that I'm trying to do, trying to accomplish. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I've heard it said it can be as simple as coming into every discussion, every dialogue, every meeting with the mindset of how can I help you? That might be how can I help you individually? How can I help you as a group? Knowing that by helping you, it's helping all of us, and really believing that and playing it out in all these situations, which again, that's a loving way, a compassionate, empathetic way to lead.
Yeah. So I think that's about all I was driving at for today. We probably ought to bring this one to a close, but
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's. I always love the fact that there's these synchronicities. We've called them serendipities as well. Whereas you and I are going in our different lives, and I don't think we've been together in person for who knows how long. We've only been together online. It's been a long time. But even as we're going through our lives, our parenting, our jobs, whenever we connect, we'll say, "Hey, did you see this? And did you hear that?" And it's all weaving these themes together in so many different places, which to me are just great confirmations that we're onto something, right? That there is a truth, right? An objective truth that's beyond just my perception or just my feeling or just my subjective view of it. And I really believe, and I think we both believe together, we have talked about this over and over, that if we can discover that, if we can continue to seek for that, and then submit to it, as you have said so eloquently, that's better for me. That's better for all of us. It's better for our society. It's better for our humanity. And so I'm just glad that we're having these discussions for my own benefit, and knowing that, the whole ripple effect, that as I grow, as I learn, then that benefits the people who are in my sphere of influence, and then they in turn can help those that are around them. So for all of you that have tuned in today, we hope that this has been beneficial, eye-opening, challenging in a good way, and that you'll be able to take these interesting discussions, these threads, and apply them, because as we have said before, inspiration without implementation is just delusion. So it doesn't really do any of us good if we don't make changes, if we don't take what may be uncomfortable steps towards a preferred future. So may all of us have the desire and the motivation, that from the inspiration to take the implementation, to take those steps to make change. And I think, I know that submitting that then to God and saying, "God, I need your help," right? There's that authenticity and humility, saying, I can't do it by myself, or even if I could, I don't want to. So on behalf of Joe McCarthy and John Comfort, thank you all for tuning in to this discussion. We will continue our Good Stuff podcasts as long as we have valuable things to share. So until next time, have a great day, and may your life be filled with great serendipities and synchronicities along the way.
Amen.